Imagine walking onto the biggest stage in sports, knowing that no matter who wins, millions of people might hate the result. Imagine hearing 80,000 fans roar, while politicians watch from behind closed doors, soldiers stand on alert, and one wrong moment could spark an international crisis. It sounds like the plot of a movie, but it actually happened. This is the story of a World Cup match that many believe should never have been played, yet history made sure it happened anyway. Okay, let's dive into this. The FIFA World Cup has always claimed to unite the world, right? We're told that for 90 minutes, politics just disappears. But reality has never been that simple. Behind the shiny trophies, the celebrations, and those unforgettable goals, there are stories of fear, high-stakes diplomacy, and deep conflict that rarely make the highlight reels. Among them stands one match in particular that became far, far more than just football. It became this massive symbol of political tension, so intense that players found themselves carrying the weight of entire nations right on their shoulders. The question wasn't just who would win, it was whether football itself could survive being caught right in the middle. Now, to really understand why this game became so controversial, you have to look beyond the stadium. Throughout history, international football has basically reflected the world's biggest political struggles. You see, countries don't simply wear jerseys out there. They carry their history, their pride, some incredibly painful memories, and sometimes literally generations of conflict onto the pitch. When fierce rivals meet, every tackle, every goal, and every celebration can be interpreted as something much, much bigger than sport. Fans often believe they're just watching 90 minutes of football. Governments, though, they sometimes see something entirely different. Section 1, the 1978 Dictatorship Tournament, a global debate on sport and politics. So let's rewind to the 1978 FIFA World Cup in Argentina. A military dictatorship was in power, and they were absolutely determined to use the tournament to reshape how the entire world viewed their country, especially amid widespread reports of political repression and human rights abuses. Suddenly, the World Cup was no longer just about football. It became a global debate over whether sport should even continue while these serious political questions remained unanswered. And as the tournament unfolded, another layer of controversy emerged. Argentina desperately needed a convincing victory over Peru to reach the final. What happened next would become one of football's greatest mysteries. They won 6-0, exactly the margin they needed. Almost immediately, rumors exploded. Were political pressures involved? Had secret agreements influenced the final result? Or was it simply an incredible football performance? Decades later, these debates are actually still going strong because no definitive evidence has ever truly settled every question. That scoreline remains one of the most discussed results in World Cup history, reminding everyone how quickly politics and suspicion can completely overshadow a sport. Section 2, the shadow of war. Emotional weight beyond the game. And that 1978 match definitely wasn't the only World Cup game burdened by political tension. 4 years later, another unforgettable chapter unfolded at the 1982 FIFA World Cup in Spain. Just weeks before the tournament kicked off, the Falklands War had erupted between Argentina and England. Young soldiers were fighting and dying, while football teams prepared to compete on the world's biggest sporting stage. Now, even though Argentina and England didn't actually meet during that tournament, the political atmosphere transformed every single discussion surrounding both teams. Players were repeatedly asked about war instead of tactics. Supporters viewed victories through a lens of patriotic emotion rather than just sporting achievement. Even neutral observers were left wondering whether football could ever truly separate itself from events unfolding thousands of miles away. Section 3, Revenge and Sporting Genius. 1986, Argentina versus England. Fate finally delivered what so many had anticipated: Argentina versus England. 4 years after the conflict in the South Atlantic, the two nations stood face to face once again, but this time with a football instead of weapons. Before kickoff, millions expected revenge, redemption, or some form of symbolic justice, and what followed became one of the most famous games ever played. Diego Maradona scored the infamous Hand of God goal, a moment that still fiercely divided opinion decades later. But then, just minutes later, he produced what many consider the single greatest goal in World Cup history, effortlessly dribbling past multiple English defenders before scoring. Those two moments created one of football's greatest contradictions. One goal represented massive controversy and outrage. The other represented pure, breathtaking genius. Together, they basically transformed a political rivalry into sporting mythology. Maradona later admitted that the first goal felt like symbolic revenge, though not in a literal military sense, obviously. But his comments only deepened that intense emotional connection between football and national identity. For many Argentinians, that victory brought a huge sense of pride during a really difficult period. For many English fans, the defeat carried a frustration that extended way beyond football. Ultimately, this one match had become a permanent cultural memory that neither country was ever going to forget. Section 4, the FIFA Neutrality Dilemma. Challenging the ideal of neutrality. It's important to realize that political tension at the World Cup has never belonged to just one generation. Nations experiencing diplomatic disputes have repeatedly found themselves sharing the same tournament bracket. FIFA insists football should remain politically neutral, yet the world's realities constantly challenge that ideal. And honestly, perhaps that's because international football is incredibly unique. Think about it. Club teams represent cities or organizations, but national teams, they represent entire identities. They carry flags, rich histories, and collective memories that stretch far beyond sport. When countries with difficult relationships meet, football becomes a stage where emotions that have been building up for decades suddenly have exactly 90 minutes to express themselves. Players will often insist they're only focused on the match, but everyone watching knows there's a whole other story unfolding beneath the surface. But here's the real irony. These politically charged matches sometimes produce moments of truly remarkable humanity. You'll see opposing players embrace after absolutely brutal contests. Fans will exchange jerseys outside stadiums, and rivals who were fully expected to show hostility instead demonstrate deep mutual respect. Those images rarely receive as much attention as the big controversies, yet they might actually reveal football's greatest strength. It proves that even under enormous political pressure, individuals can still choose sportsmanship over division. That raises an uncomfortable question. Should FIFA refuse to stage matches involving nations locked in serious political disputes? At first glance, it sounds reasonable. Why risk inflaming tensions? But avoiding those matches creates a whole other problem. If politics decides who can compete, football loses the very neutrality it claims to protect. The World Cup exists entirely on the premise that every qualified nation earns the right to play, regardless of global disagreements. That principle has certainly been tested over the years, but abandoning it, that would fundamentally change the tournament itself. The undeniable truth is that no World Cup match exists in complete isolation from the world outside the stadium. Political leaders completely understand the power of sporting victories. Fans naturally attach emotional meaning to international competition. And of course, media narratives tend to amplify every single controversial moment. Sometimes, football reflects politics. Sometimes, politics tries to exploit football. And occasionally, as history has shown us, both become virtually impossible to separate. Section 5. A mirror of humanity. Remembering the emotion. When people look back and remember these matches, they rarely remember every pass or every tactical adjustment. What do they remember? The emotions, the silence right before kickoff, the palpable tension in the crowd. They remember that overwhelming feeling that something larger than sport was unfolding in front of millions of viewers. Those moments remind us that football is never played inside a vacuum. It truly reflects humanity, with all its triumphs, its flaws, its conflicts, and its hopes. Maybe that's exactly why the World Cup continues to fascinate generations. Every tournament promises unforgettable goals and dramatic finishes, but every so often, it delivers something even more powerful, a stark reminder that a simple game can reveal the absolute deepest divisions and occasionally the greatest possibilities within our world. Some matches decide champions, others become history lessons completely disguised as football. And the matches nobody wanted to play often end up becoming the ones nobody can ever forget.